This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. We were just showing the images outside the courthouse in London, and for radio listeners, you can go to our website at democracynow.org. This is Democracy Now!, and I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Our guest on Democracy Now! Video stream from Brazil is Glenn Greenwald, the constitutional law attorney and political and legal blogger for Salon.com. His latest piece is about Bradley Manning. Now, Glenn Greenwald, as Julian Assange is now being released, he'll be staying in the home of the head of the Frontline Club, a journalist club in London. Debate over whether his ankle bracelet will work in the mansion. So that's what they're working out now, these final details as we broadcast this. Explain exactly what Bradley Manning has been charged with, because I think that's often confused as well.
Right. As of now, he's been charged basically with transmitting classified information without authorization, not treason or anything along those lines. And those charges, given the magnitude of what he's alleged to have transferred, carries a very significant prison term. I believe it's up to 72 or 80 years. And there's certainly an expectation that the government could add much more serious charges, still as serious as those are, to the panoply of accusations that Manning faces. And that seems to be what the government here is doing. Is there's actually, as you indicated earlier, and we, I think, are going to talk about a New York Times article this morning that suggests that the government is trying to pressure Manning into cooperating and giving incriminating testimony in order to enable them, excuse me, to have a case against WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. And what it appears is that the government is using both the repressive conditions and the threat of more serious charges still as a means of coercing him into doing that.
Yeah, Glenn, I wanted to ask you about that article because it includes the shocking revelation that the government may actually be trying to turn Manning, who they say is a guy who actually gathered all of the documents, against Assange as a way of going after Assange. This whole issue of looking at Assange as a co-conspirator, as someone who colluded with Manning in grabbing all of these documents, raises questions, as any journalist knows, and I've been in the business for more than 30 years, when a whistleblower comes to you and says, look, I have important information, the first thing you do is say, well, I would need some documentation of what you're alleging. You've got to, can you get some emails? Can you get some documents that would back up your assertions? And so to now say that that is colluding with the whistleblower to get this information illegally from the government would really create a major problem for journalists in this country and around the world.
Yeah, I'm really glad you made that point, Juan, and I really hope that more journalists will and do. The dilemma that the government is facing is the following. They're, on the one hand, facing significant political pressure to take serious action against Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, meaning prosecution or worse. On the other hand, though, there's really no way to prosecute Julian Assange and WikiLeaks without criminalizing the very essence of investigative journalism. WikiLeaks has done nothing that every good investigative journalist doesn't do all the time. There are multiple journalists in the United States who have Pulitzer Prizes sitting on their shelf for having obtained and then published very serious classified information that the government insisted posed grave national security harm. And so in order to get around this, they're trying to distinguish WikiLeaks from other journalists. And what they first tried to do is to say, well, WikiLeaks just recklessly publishes, indiscriminately publishes everything. And of course, that's totally false, because WikiLeaks has published only a tiny sliver of the cables that it has received and has worked closely with these newspapers around the world to decide what ought to be published. So what they're trying to do now is to say that WikiLeaks, unlike journalists, isn't merely a passive recipient of classified information, but is actively trying to induce the leak of classified information the way that a spy would. But as you just pointed out, and as cannot be emphasized enough, whenever journalists are aware or become aware of classified information that they want to publish, they take all kinds of affirmative steps to encourage more documents to be given to them, to encourage the source to allow their publication, to contact other people in government to try and get even more classified information to confirm what they've learned or to elaborate on it. Journalists are very rarely mere passive recipients of classified information. One day you just sit there and it shows up in your email box. Journalists, good journalists, always take affirmative and active role in trying to get more classified information and secure the right to publish classified documents. And if this is the theory that they're going to use to try and criminalize WikiLeaks, that's at least as much of a threat, if not more so, to investigative journalism as simply charging them under the Espionage Act for publishing classified information standing alone.
Glenn Greenwald, I want to play a clip of what Daniel Ellsberg had to say about Bradley Manning. Daniel Ellsberg's perhaps the country's most famous whistleblower. In 1971, he leaked the secret history of U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War, known as the Pentagon Papers. We've interviewed him a number of times about WikiLeaks. This is what he said about Bradley Manning when he recently spoke to us.
What Lamo reports Manning is saying has a very familiar and persuasive ring to me. He reports Manning as having said that what he had read and what he was passing on were horrible evidence of horrible machinations by the U.S., backdoor dealings throughout the Middle East, and in many cases, as he put it, almost crimes. And let me guess that he's not a lawyer, but I'll guess that what looked to him like crimes are crimes that he was putting out. We know that he put out, or at least it's very plausible that he put out, the videos that he claimed to Lamo, and that's enough to go on to get them interested in pursuing both him and the other. And show what it comes down to me is, and I say throwing caution to the winds here, is that what I've heard so far of Assange and Manning, and I haven't met either of them, is that they are two new heroes of mine.
That was Daniel Ellsberg talking about Bradley Manning, the intelligence private in Iraq, who is believed to have downloaded many, many documents from the U.S. government and released them to WikiLeaks, and Julian Assange. That's who he's talking about. And as we broadcast this, Glenn Greenwald, Julian Assange is expected to walk out any minute from the London court. He will be basically under house arrest. I mean, he will be wearing a ankle bracelet. He's put up $300,000 bail. And the latest news that's come out of the Guardian newspaper in Britain is that it wasn't Swedish authorities, but British authorities who decided to keep him in jail, though they had granted him bail a week ago, or 48 hours ago. Can you talk about the significance of what you believe is happening here around issues of extradition?
Well, ironically, it's the WikiLeaks documents, among other things, that show how closely the United States and the British government work on virtually every single aspect of the war on terror. There were documents, for example, very incriminating documents that made a lot of news in Great Britain, but not, of course, in the United States, that showed that there was a vaunted investigation launched by the British government into their role in misleading its citizenry into attacking Iraq. And diplomatically, they were assuring the United States and Bush officials that they would be shielded and protected from embarrassing revelations as part of that procedure. And of course, the Obama administration received the same assurances and sought them and received them. And so the British and the United States have long been working hand in hand on all kinds of abuses of due process and other attacks on liberty throughout the war on terror. And so it would be very surprising if they weren't collaborating on what to do about Julian Assange. And I think clearly the fact that the British are so eager to keep him behind bars in a case where under normal circumstances that would never happen, and now they're going to have an ankle tag on him so they know his whereabouts all the time. Certainly, the reasonable assumption is that that's part of the effort to make sure that if and when the United States wants to extradite him, they will at all times have him under their thumb.
And Bradley Manning could face death?
Absolutely. I mean, there's no question that those charges could entail the death penalty, certainly, not the ones now, but the ones they're threatening to impose, including treason. And clearly that's something they're going to hang over his head to try and get him to say the things they need him to say to make a case against WikiLeaks.
Glenn Greenwald, thanks so much for being with us. Constitutional law attorney, political and legal blogger for Salon.com, speaking to us from Brazil. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. Juan?